Welcome, guys, here to the Gamma Project. Thank you for tuning in again for yet another Q&A session. Today, I have George all the way from Bristol, and we are going to talk about some interesting topics for you guys out there, hopefully shedding some light to some serious questions. Welcome, George.
Welcome. Well, thank you. Thanks, Justin.
No problems. George, do you want to kick off and shoot with the first question as to what could help our viewers get better results, not only in the gym, but possibly in the wellness of their lives too?
Yeah, so I remember going over this in the beginning of the mentorship, and it's kind of fuzzy. So I thought, go over again. How can eating in a sympathetic state affect the digestion process, if it does at all? Yeah.
Very good question. Okay, so I put up a post about this the other day. I think something about this morning as well about.
Yeah, you did. I saw that today.
Yeah, about eating fat, eating a diet high in saturated fat when you're in a sympathetic state. So when you're in a sympathetic state, in essence, okay, regardless of its interaction with gastric hormones, all right, so we can get into that in a moment, but just logically, when the body is stressed out, it gives muscle more blood flow, because in blood flow, we're going to have access to glucose, right? So glucose is stored in our bloodstream, as well as in forms of glycogen in muscle and liver tissue as well, right? So we store approximately between 400 and 700 grams of glucose in skeletal muscle, and about 100 grams in our liver, all right, of glycogen. But there is a very small amount that's in the bloodstream that's more readily available. So the storage of glycogen or glucose that's stored in the form of glycogen makes up the bulk of our carbohydrate-based or glycolytic-based energy stores. However, in order to access that, it's got to go through a process of energy release, right? Which is what stress does. So what does stress do? It causes a release or causes activity of sympathetic receptors to become active. And in doing so, the adrenals are actually situated around very close to the area where most of the receptors for sympathetic action take place. So the adrenals become active, right? And the adrenals start to release catecholamines, and catecholamines initiate the release of glucose from stores within our body as well. Other hormones like glucagon, which is also produced in the pancreas along with insulin, also releases glucose, but more for the modulation of glucose at rest rather than for the release of glucose at times of stress. Okay. Now, what does that really mean in the world we live in? Well, to be honest, we're very few and far between are we in moments of rest, right? Because we are constantly bombarded by stressful stimuli all day long, right? Particularly when it comes to technology. So our bodies are releasing far more catecholamines than what they should, which is the reason why a lot of people have issues with their digestive systems, everything from IBS, Crohn's, heartburn, you name it, right? Not to mention bacterial overgrowth and Candida, H. pylori, and all those beautiful ailments that people have to contend with, right? Now, when you eat food, when you're in a stressful state, in essence, like I said, before getting into endocrine hormone function, you're taking blood that is stored within the viscera, so around the organs, right? And the body says, oh, we need that blood flow to go through to the tissue, the periphery, muscle tissue, for the purpose of fueling the need to get away from the danger. Right, so more blood flow goes from the organs to the extremities, and all of a sudden, your body is primed to either defend itself or to flee from whatever is happening. And that's a sympathetic reaction. Right? Everybody is well aware of the flight or fright response, right? In order to establish a fight or flight response, tissue requires more energy. So you take energy away from the organs, you place it to the muscle tissue, and boom, you have a scenario whereby you can respond to that stimulus or that stress. But the downside to that is the blood flow that once helped digestion is no longer there in abundance of what it would be if you weren't in an excessively sympathetic state, right? So gut motility starts to go, and when motility starts to have an issue, then we got to contend with everything from enzymic reactions not taking place in the position where they should, or in accordance to how they should in their process of digesting food and accessing nutrients. Okay, we also have a dysfunction of bile release as well that could occur and then through dysfunctional bile release, it doesn't take place. We also can have an issue with bicarbonate not necessarily being released after an acidic environment has been established through the release of hydrochloric acid from the stomach itself. In order for hydrochloric acid, which is very important to actually be released for the activation or to promote activity of both pancreatase as well as other digestive enzymes, including pepsin, which mediates bile release too, we require gastrin. Okay, gastrin needs to be released in order for hydrochloric acid to be released in the right quantities to promote digestive enzyme activity. The thing is, catecholamines are high, gastrin is low. It's very similar to the scenario with insulin and catecholamines as well. When insulin is high, cortisol will be low. All right, they're inversely related to one another. So when you have a high abundance of cortisol, which is the end product of norepinephrine and epinephrine release, what you will notice is that gastrin function starts to become impaired. So you don't release the right quantity or the right timing of hydrochloric acid into the digestive process. So it might be released later than what it should, which causes even more havoc, heartburn, and so on, which most people probably have contended with after eating a meal. Now, half an hour later, they start to get heartburn. That's because hydrochloric acid hasn't been released at the right time, because the digestive function of the gastric endocrine system hasn't taken precedent at the right timing of nutrient breakdown or metabolism of food. All right, so it's been released after it should have been released in the first place. And that all comes down to a dysfunctional gastric endocrine system, which could be mediated, or for the most part is mediated, by a sympathetic state within our autonomic nervous system.
So just real quick, just to recap the last bit. The high catecholamine restricts gastrin, which restricts hydrochloric acid, which restricts enzyme production to help digest food.
Exactly. So the acidity that hydrochloric acid would create within the stomach would initiate a response. Just remember, our body's always trying to maintain homeostasis, right?
Yeah.
So the body doesn't want to be too acidic and doesn't want to be too alkaline. So when you get to a certain point of a threshold of acidity, the body says, okay, cool, we need to release certain alkaline reactions in order to bring down the level of acidity. So releases like bicarbonate, and that's released after both gastrin and pepsin are released. So when pepsin is released, it initiates the release of bile, and when gastrin is released, it releases the HCl, which mediates pancreatic enzyme release as well for the process of breaking down proteins, carbohydrates, and lipids as well. Okay, so in order for those enzymes to be active in their release, there needs to be a certain threshold of acidity. If that threshold of acidity isn't achieved, then the pancreas is not going to necessarily, or the gallbladder isn't necessarily going to release the right quantity of bile or pancreatic enzymes, all right? Because there isn't a need to create an alkaline environment, or there isn't enough of an alkaline environment to warrant enzymic activity to create a reaction. Okay. So in order for the body to mediate an acidic response, it cannot be in a heightened state of acidity. What mediates a heightened state of acidity? Catecholamines, because they release an abundance of sugar into our bloodstream, which causes our pH level to go toward an acid-like state, right? If we have a high acid-like state, the body is not going to mediate an excessive release of more acid-promoting hormones or acids in order to create more acidity, because that would be counterproductive to the purpose of sustaining homeostasis. So you have an environment, you're eating a lot of food, all of a sudden you're not releasing gastrin because you're too acidic in the first place. That food doesn't get digested very well. And through it not being digested not only in the stomach, when it starts into the small intestine, there aren't enough enzymes being released because there hasn't been enough threshold of acidity achieved within the stomach. And all of a sudden it hits into the small intestine, it causes the negative reaction. Then all of a sudden that negative reaction, because now the body sees, oh, we're too alkaline, now let's release more gastrin. Now let's release more hydrochloric acid, but it releases after the time when it should have released it when the food first enters into the system, right? So now all of a sudden you have a lot of stomach acid being released, and the time where a lot of the food has actually passed through partial digestion into the small intestinal tract.
Wow.
So this is the problem that we need to consider and contend with when we're trying to eat a lot of food while we're in a stressed out state. It's just not beneficial for us.
Yeah. And is that so? I remember you telling us not to take post-workout shakes. I'm guessing this is the reason why. But does that have to do with the shake itself as well, or is it just this, and the shake isn't that bad?
The reason why I don't like post-workout shakes is there are multiple reasons. Firstly, in order to create, although whey protein might have a high level of bioavailability for cells, and the reason why it's highly bioavailable is because it's extremely insulinogenic. Okay, most people don't recognize that. So because it's so insulinogenic, and just remember, any nutrition source that's highly insulinogenic, guess what also has a high bioavailability to the body? What would you think it is, George? Apart from whey protein, what other nutritional source do you think would also have a high bioavailability level of bioavailability for the human body?
Sugar.
Refined sugar, extremely high bioavailability to the body. If you compare refined sugar to sweet potato or complex carbohydrate, it has a far greater bioavailability than sweet potato does to the body. That doesn't necessarily mean sugar is good for you. That doesn't necessarily mean whey protein is good for you. Whey protein is extremely insulinogenic, right? So it promotes high insulin loads to mediate a glucose disposal that would be present in the system. Now, there's a lot of studies done on the fact that excessive glucose after training needs to be modulated in order for better recovery to take place. Yes, sure, I don't dispute that for a moment. However, I will say this, that when you do go through a process of metabolizing glucose, mediated through a stress response like that of exercise, the quicker that you create the metabolism of cortisol, the more load that you put on, more stress load you put onto the liver to contend with metabolizing that excessive amount of cortisol. Now, if you are going to give yourself a nutrition source that is refined and doesn't necessarily have all the raw nutrients or the bioavailable or I can say end step bioavailable range of nutrients, right? So you get like cobalamin, you get methylcobalamin as well, right? So it's been methylated, cobalamin that's been methylated, in other words. Or you get pyridoxine, but you get pyridoxine 5-phosphate, all right? So you have enzymic reactions that have already taken place to certain vitamins, making them more bioavailable. But for the most part, a lot of these shakes don't have their end state, we call it, vitamins and minerals that are more accessible to the body because they don't require as much process of modification, all right, in order for the vitamin to become accessible. So what happens? The current stores of accessible vitamins and nutrients, minerals, are depleted at a higher rate to enable that cortisol to be metabolized at a quicker pace. So the quicker that you use something, right, the quicker you access the use of a system, the more likely that you're going to deplete the resources of that system. Okay, so yes, whey protein helps recovery. It speeds it up rapidly, right? But what about not the 48-hour window, which is always equated to, what about the 48-day window? All right, that's something to consider. Not only do we have to consider the 48-day window on its role with liver detoxification processes, all right, so that of modification and conjugation pathways, which can negatively influence as well. We also have to consider how the raw materials from protein shakes actually fuel the growth of unwanted bacteria in the gut. All right. So in particular, look at Candida. All right. If you give a person that has an overgrowth of Candida whey protein to have post-workout, I can guarantee you, with all my experience, that it doesn't prove to be beneficial whatsoever. All right. Now, that can be due to a whole multitude of reasons, but in particular, I believe it's due to the fact that the insulin activity that whey protein mediates. right, promoting a greater release of glucose into the small intestinal tract. And excessively or highly accessible glucose sources of nutrition fuel the growth of unwanted bacteria, because unwanted bacteria live off sugar. They love sugar. Any anti-candida diet that you may be put on would always stipulate to avoid sugar or carbohydrates, some of them, at all cost, because of the fact that unwanted bacteria proliferate in a state or an environment that has access to high amounts of refined, simple glucose.
Awesome. That makes sense with the reset diet and the whole check diet as well. Cool. Do you want to move on to the next one?
We sure can. Yes.
Just because I'm looking at the time and I know you have to go soon. We spoke about this last week or a couple of weeks ago, and I was just wondering, with anatomy trains, would it be beneficial to avoid adjusting a client if not appropriately educated in the subject? So if we have, it's dangerous to have a little bit of knowledge. So if we only know a little bit and how some of the trainings work, would it be better to just leave the client to be and maybe see someone else that could adjust them because of the chain reaction it can cause in the body and the fascia?
Okay, to answer that question, I'm going to propose a scenario, right? If you're an engineer, right, and you only know how to build a train track that can cross over a river, right, a bridge of a train track to cross over a river, yet the length of your entire network, rail network, stems over rivers, around mountains, in suburbs, in commercial settings or cities, do you think it would be wise for you to take over the entire project toward developing a national rail network?
Probably not.
So that exactly answers my question. So I just, this is the thing about professionalism, right? That, in my career, in my early years of my career, unfortunately, I was very ignorant in my application, and this is the very formal years of my career of, having done a few days course through a lot of well-known so-called gurus. And after doing this course, you feel as though there's all to know, and you are now professional. And the reality is you don't know anything. You've read a few books, you've done a few practical sessions, and that does not entitle you to being considered a professional. What does entitle you to being professional is whether you can practice your education in a controlled setting and measure the outcome along with another professional that has been doing it for a considerable amount of time. Right. So, as a therapist, I've had 5 years of experience, and 3 of those years were spent shadowing other professionals that have far more qualification than I have currently, particularly in that period of time, in order to establish my understanding of the human body. Right. So just because you understand a small segment of it doesn't mean you've mastered it. And if you apply a technique or a strategy without complete consideration of the outcome, then you are negligent in your practice. A better way to go about it is in the process of learning, right, of what to do, instead of trying to do everything that you don't quite yet understand, get somebody to help you that does understand. Right? So apply a method, but apply it with guidance and supervision of somebody that has a bit more experience than you. And if it's not in your field of expertise or field of interest, which I think is even more important than a field of expertise, then refer out. Don't be a jack of all trades. It's one thing to educate, but it's another thing to diagnose. I educate my clients on the outcomes of imbalanced neurology, but I definitely don't diagnose. If any of them are exhibiting serious symptoms, I refer out within my network for other people to help them. And the same thing with biochemistry. Now, I've only got a national certificate. I haven't got a degree in biochemistry. So although I know a fair amount about biochemistry, I'm not a specialist. And if anyone were to exhibit serious symptoms on either a blood panel, or a stool sample, that they wouldn't be simple enough to pinpoint, it'd be more of a complex issue, refer out. Don't try to treat a symptom that you have no qualification to do. So it's great to expand. One day you'll be able to do it, right? But you won't be able to learn if you feel like you know everything today. So, putting your ego in your pocket and acknowledging that there's still lots for you to learn enables you to continue to develop. All right, so that you can become a specialist in different fields. But no matter how old you get and how long you've been in the industry, you're not going to be a specialist in every field, because it's just not, unless you're immortal, there's not enough time in life in order to become a specialist in every field. So that's why it's very important to establish a good network of professionals that have worked firstly on yourself, so you can understand their thinking, because there's no better way in which to promote the services of which you believe in than if you have had experienced it yourself. Okay, so always to have a few sessions done with people that you refer out. Don't just refer somebody out because you think they're good. You need to know that they're good. All right, that's very, very important. So does that answer your question, George?
100%, yeah, for sure, makes sense. Yeah, thank you. And the final one was more because I missed the last mentorship, which was a shame because I was finding it really interesting at the time I was there. But if we could just chat very briefly about transneural degeneration. I saw on the slide the OCFUS disorders. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
OCFUS disorders?
Oxidative phosphorylation disorders. Yep.
Here we go. With the 4 points each. So I don't know if that would, because again, I'm going to go through them and go through the PDF. So just if you have like, I don't know, a brief overview, it seemed interesting. And yeah, that'll be a good topic.
Well, oxidative phosphorylative disorders, to put it in a nutshell, there are 5 complexes that work with one another toward the common goal of production of ATP through the mitochondria. Right? But in order for those complexes to take a proper effect, we have both a mitochondrial matrix and the inner membrane of the mitochondrial structure. Now, the matrix is basically where the mitochondrial DNA is contained, along with hundreds of enzymes that are utilized within the inner membrane chamber for the production of energy. Now, the matrix is the first point of contact with the environment within the mitochondrial structure. Thereby, if any influence to the matrix will cause an influence within the inner membrane to create energy itself. Right now, one of the biggest disorders in mitochondrial inefficiency is oxidative phosphorylative disorders for certain enzymic reactions, in particular cytochrome C oxidase. Okay. When we start to have inhibition of complex 4 taking on the last reactive process along the whole complex chain, what we will find is that the mitochondria doesn't produce as much ATP, but it has to work far harder. In other words, we produce less ATP, but more free radicals in its energy production cycle. And that can be mediated through an abundance of stimuli, but in particular, it is mediated through auto-oxidation of certain types of neurotransmitters.
All right, Jesus. That
was brief. That's very brief, but a topic more for the fitness community than the general population, because it's quite complex. But
absolutely. I'm looking forward to reading through it. But, all right, cool. Sounds good. Also, I just remember this. I wanted to ask you about it. With so I heard Poliquin talk about getting his athletes to lean down before doing anything with them, and getting them off carbs, right? Or depending on how they deal with certain food groups, getting them very lean. One of the reasons is insulin sensitivity. You want to get people's insulin sensitivity up so you could basically have a better effect with everything that they do. I know that the reset diet also has to do with the gut and everything that's involved there. But I was wondering, the point of all this, long story short, is would it be beneficial to fast at all to help that reset, or to achieve the objective of a reset diet? I'm not sure even what I'm asking really, but in terms of, would it be beneficial to go on like day, 2 days, even a week fast?
No.
help reset, or not at all?
No, definitely not. I don't believe so. I know there's a lot of benefits to fasting that people proclaim. However, if you think about it logically, when you fast, what does your body have to do in order to release energy into the blood?
Is it the gluconeogenesis of the fat?
And in order to initiate that, what does it have to do? In order to release any energy from any store in the body, what needs to be released to mediate that energy release?
I don't know, you've lost me. Sorry.
Sympathetic response.
Ah, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
So if somebody is in need of a reset, okay, talk about a gut reset, they're more than likely, what is more than likely to be the reason as to why they have discord occurring in their gut, in particular in the small intestine. They can also have issue in the large intestine by all means, particularly if their carbohydrate sources have been refined for a long period of time, or have had considerate amounts of adulterants like gluten or wheat added to their diet as well. I call them adulterants because I find that they create more neurological issues than anything else. So neurotoxins, in my opinion. But why would these individuals have a gut compromised issue in the first place? What is probably the biggest reason for having a compromised gut?
Would be unwanted bacteria growth? Or?
Yeah, but what would mediate that?
Well, wasn't it what you just said? The certain food groups, like the gluten, like the adulterants, or the...
It can most definitely fuel it for sure.
Or is it the stress?
Stress inhibits gastric endocrine function. When you inhibit gastric endocrine function, you compromise how nutrients are broken down. When nutrients or food isn't broken down effectively, it ferments. Right, and the fermentation process only fuels unwanted bacterial overgrowth. In particular, if you do not break down proteins, right, animal proteins. Fermentation of animal proteins is probably the most destructive and causes the highest increased risk of H. pylori, right, out of every other nutrient that's improperly digested. Okay, so the biggest reason why a lot of people have issues within their gut, yes, you can have sensitivities, or you can have additions into the diet that cause overgrowth, all right, like gluten, like wheat, barley, whatever it might be, whatever their sensitivity for that person might be. Sugar, obviously the most common, dairy, lactose. So all these can add fuel to the fire without a doubt. Now, I'm not disputing that fact. However, right, in order for that fuel to warrant a fire in the first place, or to take hold of the fire in the first place, you have to consider what's caused the fire.
Mm.
When a person is overstimulated, if you take an athlete, right, that's been overstimulated for a prolonged period of time due to excessive training, conditioning work, whatever it is, a professional athlete. I mean, most professional athletes have an inflamed intestinal tract. This is the reason why after a season, they fall ill or fall prone to injury when they haven't got as much adrenaline running through their system. Okay, so you take somebody like that and you say to them, I would like for you to fast now. Right? I would like for you, in other words, I would like for you to limit the amount of available energy coming in through your digestive tract, and I want your body to access stored energy from fat cells, right? For example, through fast, which is the biggest reason why people want to fast now, is to access energy through ketones, all right? I would like for you to do that, right? Which is great. Cool. Okay, cool. So in other words, how are we going to mediate the release of energy from fat in the form of ketones? We need to increase what? Acidity in the body. All right. You're not going to release energy from fat cells in an alkaline state. I can guarantee you that much.
Oh, really?
No.
Okay. Yeah.
So you release it. And this is the problem with Atkins diets. Is a problem with semi-fasting, fasting, whatever you want to call it. Because the fact, yes, they do create a lot of fat loss. I'm not going to dispute that, but they create a lot of stress onto the autonomic nervous system. And when you stress the autonomic nervous system, the imbalance between catabolic and anabolic reactions starts to occur. And an imbalance of homeostasis shifts the needle. right? The needle of performance, right? Integration between the fascial and the neural net, which will compromise circulation of the circulatory net within our body as well. Right, and you've seen this. Anybody you've ever known that's gone on a high-fat, low-carbohydrate diet, or a paleo diet without carbohydrates, or any of these type of quick fix protocols, within the first 2 weeks, they feel more energized. 100%, they have more mental energy, they say. Week 3 comes, that same person is anxious, more aggressive, more what they call assertive. It's not assertive. It's really it's not assertive. It's a nice word to dress up exact feeling anxious and feeling aggressive. And the reason why they feel more anxious and more aggressive because their bodies are in a more acid-like state.
And that relates back to the sympathetic state.
Exactly.
And it's like a vice versa thing. So one will bring on the other.
A better course of action to do if you're trying to get somebody into, I agree with Paul regarding getting a person's body fat levels down prior to getting into high performance periodization protocol, right? Because lower body fat correlates to an increased sensitivity of androgen receptors. All right, and increased sensitivity of androgen receptors is obviously going to correlate to increased production or function of thyroid activity, which is also then going to regulate a more optimal anabolic response in homeostasis. In other words, greater parasympathetic reactions after a sympathetic induction. Okay. However, I don't agree with giving a high-fat, low-carbohydrate diet to everyone. I'm not saying you can't give it to someone, but you have to consider the variables of the neurological state. And in particular, the autonomic nervous system, the status of the autonomic nervous system, which tells you a lot about the state of the central nervous system. How do we measure that? Well, there's a lot of different protocols. You can obviously utilize complex blood panels, measure everything from prolactin levels to DHEA sulfate levels. If you really want to measure cortisol saliva levels, you can. I don't believe they're very accurate, in all honesty. You can measure correlation between triglyceride and cholesterol levels, which also gives you a very good indication as to how much catecholamines are being released and how well insulin is being mediated in its function. Okay, but those are complex panels. But you can do this very simple blood glucose barometer and measure semi-fasted states or pre and postprandial effects. And it gives you a very cheap, pretty accurate, not as accurate as a full blood panel. I'm not going to lie and say it's as accurate as that, but it's pretty accurate, and it's far less invasive and less expensive to do as well. And you can do it every single day, which is great. So you can measure real world and real time responses toward a dietary influence. So sometimes getting somebody lean requires a diet of good complex carbohydrates that will not fuel unwanted bacterial growth. And there are certain carbohydrates that have an oligosaccharide makeup that does not fuel the growth of unwanted bacteria. Right? So not all carbohydrates are going to fuel the growth of unwanted bacteria, as the media might make people believe or lead people to believe. That is not true. There are certain carbohydrates that have certain enzymes and certain saccharide complexes that will fuel bacterial overgrowth, but not all of them have that exact makeup. Right? Otherwise, we would live in a world of uniformed norm where everybody and everything would look the same. And thank God that's not the case, because I'm far prettier than you, George. I'm just kidding. I'll just joke you, George.
That might be true.
Much prettier, George. So, these are things to consider with regards to. Yes, I agree completely with Charles. I think getting someone leaner before putting them into intense periodization is extremely beneficial and a very good shout. But how to go about getting someone leaner and how to go about increasing insulin sensitivity, you don't just increase insulin sensitivity by taking out carbohydrates, because I can tell you this much: if you have a food sensitivity reaction to a type of protein or type of fat source, you're more than likely not going to increase insulin sensitivity, because you're creating an adaptive immune response, proliferating IgG reaction within the body. Right, and a proliferative IgG reaction is not going to mediate better insulin sensitivity. It's actually going to create a dampened sensitivity to the reaction of insulin. All right,
so how? Because you were saying the first 2 weeks you feel good, and then the acidity drives unwanted behavior and an anxious state. When we do the reset diet, which is a month, right? Don't we usually keep it to quite low carb, high fat diet? Or is that just because it's a month and we're trying to get certain objectives?
We do keep it. So when you and I do a reset diet, we do keep carbohydrate relatively low, right? We don't cut it out completely. We limit the sources of where it's coming from, but we don't cut out. But what do we do as well, along with mediating change of macronutrient ratios? What else do we do with training? Training load is very
it's very low, yeah.
Low, right? And what else do we also install? Recovery-based training. Okay, so sympathetic-based training is kept moderately low. Okay, whereas parasympathetic-based training that encourages more blood flow, opening of fascial lines, is increased dramatically. So the ratio of stretching, right, or yoga or sauna or whatever it might be, massage, to the ratio of, say, for example, weight training or high intensity training is pretty much kept even on a 1-to-1 basis during that time. Okay. However, when we start to get more progressive into hypertrophy or strength training based protocol, once you've gone through that reset, the ratio of sympathetic based training to parasympathetic based training is in favor of sympathetic based training, because your system can handle it. However, those ratios may change depending on the outcome and ongoing evaluation of your glucose and heart rate variability and body temperature. And at some times, in some states, we go through and to do blood panels if it has been exceedingly high for prolonged periods of time. So there's not one size that fits all. This is the moral of the story. A high-fat, low-carbohydrate diet might work for some in creating a reset, but it may not work for others. And it all comes down to understanding their individual biometrics as to the state of their nervous system and the state of their sympathetic reaction they may have to the environment. And also considering the current environment. It's one thing to deal with an athlete, right, that doesn't necessarily have an external abundance of stimuli coming to them apart from the training. Or their coach shouting at them that they're not as good as they want them to be. But if you take somebody that's sitting in a corporate environment, sat behind a computer, right, stimulated to the nth degree by an artificial interface. Let's understand one thing, George. The human brain, right, will understand whether or not it's being utilized or not being utilized. But it doesn't differentiate between it being utilized to run a marathon physically or being utilized to run a marathon mentally by processing information on a computer, right? So if you're going to take somebody that's working 10 hours a day on a computer, in essence is probably running the equivalent of 3 marathons a day with their mind, and you're going to try and put that same person into a highly acidic training program or high volume training program with very little carbohydrates to mediate that catecholamine response, you're going to set that person up for further sympathetic reactions that might cause more issues from their thyroid to their to activity within deep wave sleep promotion, so serotonin levels, or GABA promotion to glutamate conversion to GABA. When glutamate comes too high, that might become dysfunctional. All right, so there's a huge array of dysfunction that can be set in if you overstimulate a person that's in an environment that already has an excessively abundant stimuli of sympathetic reaction.
Yeah, I remember you talking about last time, and actually the first time truly applied it on the client today, where he came in, I asked him what he'd done on the weekend, and he told me he got back from a 13-hour workday in London. We live in Bristol. So instead of putting him through the ringer, we did a lot more mobility work at the beginning, and then we cut the session short to give him time to recover. And,
a client that is sat on their bum behind a computer for more than 6 hours a day, be very, very cautious of whether or not you give them big lifts that compress the spine. Okay, so like a barbell lunge or a barbell squat or anything that causes compression of the spinal column. Be very, very cautious in prescribing these type of exercises for these type of clients. all right, because they are engaging sympathetic receptors along the spinal column, which generally is overused or overstretched due to their posture, right? And now all of a sudden, the tone of those receptors and the tone of the motor units to those receptors of muscle tissue that surrounds the sympathetic reaction is going to become hypertonic already. And if you're going to load a spinal column, or you're going to load tissue that's in a position of hypertonicity, you are going to cause more havoc than good.
Makes sense.
Be considerate of what else the person is doing apart from what they're doing in the gym. Okay, an athlete is a different kettle of fish to dealing with general population.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
George, thank you very much for taking the time out of the day. Guys out there, thank you for tuning in to the Gamma Project. Stay tuned for far more informative Q&A sessions where we just break through the mold and give you the raw truth behind how to go about your nutrition or how to go about your training, and a far more educated rather than just an avocation of structure to all the variables toward better health. Thanks, guys. Stay tuned in for more and have a great day.